The wind tore through the narrow mountain pass like a living thing, hurling icy shards of snow against the timbered cabins of Copper Ridge. Inside one of those cabins, a young woman named Martha Sinclair crouched over a wooden table, her fingers trembling as they traced the edge of a small, unassuming box. The flickering candlelight danced across her pale face, casting shadows that seemed to whisper secrets long buried. You feel it too, don't you? That instinctive chill that tells you some truths are too dangerous to confront, yet impossible to ignore. For years, Martha believed she had left her past behind. The Chicago fire, the loss of her family, the grief that clawed at her heart. But the world has a way of catching up, and tonight, in this remote settlement of miners and dreamers, that past was about to erupt with all the force of a storm. She opened the box. Inside lay a photograph. The edges frayed, the image faded but unmistakable. 4 faces stared back at her. One of them was her own. The boy beside her, he was Thomas, her husband, the man she trusted with her life. And yet, the recognition in her stomach told her the impossible truth: this man was not just her husband. He was her brother. Every memory she had of him, the gentle laughter, the subtle gestures, the way he seemed to understand her without words, now struck her as sinister, as if the universe itself had conspired to deceive her. She could feel her pulse hammering, the room shrinking, the walls pressing in. There was no one to warn her, no one to guide her through this revelation. And yet, here you are, witnessing it too. Before we descend further, comment where you're watching from and hit subscribe. This knowledge is not for everyone. Martha's mind raced. How could he have survived when everyone said he was dead? How could he have orchestrated his return, his courtship, his marriage, knowing the line they were about to cross? And their daughter, Elizabeth, innocent, unaware, carrying the weight of a secret that could redefine everything she was meant to be. This is the kind of truth that changes a life forever. And now, you are part of it. You feel the pull of the hidden, the forbidden, the dangerous knowledge, lying just beneath the surface of ordinary life. As the candle sputtered and the wind screamed outside, she realized that nothing in Copper Ridge, or perhaps in the world, would ever be the same again. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed, and the first step through that door has already been taken. The mountains pressed in from every side, snowdrifts swallowing the thin boardwalks, cutting Copper Ridge off from the outside world. Inside the cabin, Martha paced like a predator trapped in her own home, her mind spinning with questions that had no answer. Every detail of Thomas's past she thought she knew now felt like a lie, carefully constructed, meticulously rehearsed. He had built an identity from ashes, a man who could walk among others without suspicion, who could seduce and deceive without leaving a trace. And yet, beneath the surface, he was still the boy she remembered, the brother who had vanished into darkness, the shadow that haunted her childhood memories. The isolation of the settlement was a crucible, intensifying everything. Every glance from a neighbor, every casual conversation in the saloon or the assay office now seemed loaded with unseen threats. Martha realized that the truth was not just theirs alone. Secrets in Copper Ridge carried consequences that rippled outward like poison. One misstep, one slip of the tongue, and the fragile order of the town could collapse under the weight of forbidden knowledge. She studied Thomas, searching for cracks in the facade, noticing the way he avoided certain topics, the way he froze when a stray comment touched too close to their shared past. Her heart ached with revulsion, but fascination laced every pulse. How could a man harbor such duplicity, yet appear so tender, so devoted? Could a single person embody both love and betrayal, creation and destruction? And then there was the child, Elizabeth, sleeping peacefully in the cradle, completely unaware of the dangerous bond that had formed her very existence. Martha could not shake the thought the consequences of their union were not theoretical. Somewhere in the hidden recesses of biology and fate, the price was waiting to reveal itself. Copper Ridge was no stranger to darkness. Men had died in mining accidents that were never questioned. Women had vanished without explanation. But this was different. This was deliberate, calculated, intimate. Thomas's deception cut deeper than any blade, more permanent than any fire, and the realization gnawed at her sanity. If he could do this to her, what was he capable of outside these walls, outside her scrutiny? She had glimpsed a mind capable of manipulating reality itself, reshaping memory and perception to suit his desires. The wind howled like a chorus of forgotten souls, carrying the bitter scent of pine and snow, a reminder that the world beyond Copper Ridge existed, yet would remain oblivious to the horror unfolding here. Martha felt herself slipping into a new consciousness, one attuned to danger, deceit, and the forbidden. Each revelation tightened the web around her, each insight demanding action, demanding clarity, demanding survival. And as you watch this, you understand too, some knowledge is a burden, yet refusing it guarantees stagnation. There is no turning back now. The nights in Copper Ridge were long, oppressive, and merciless. Shadows from the oil lamp stretched across the cabin walls, distorting everything familiar into something grotesque. Martha lay awake, her breath shallow, watching the silhouette of Thomas at the window. He sat motionless, shoulders rigid, his gaze fixed on the moonlit peaks. There was no tenderness in his posture now, only an alien stillness, as if the man she thought she knew had been hollowed out and replaced with something else. Something ancient, something waiting. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him awake from whatever darkness lived inside him, but every time she tried to imagine the words leaving her mouth, "You're my brother," her throat closed, and fear overtook her, because what if he already knew she had discovered the truth? What if the mask he wore was not for her benefit, but for his own survival? A man who could build a new identity could just as easily destroy anyone who threatened it. By day, she forced herself into routine, teaching the miners' children, smiling politely at neighbors, feeding Elizabeth, and yet, beneath the veil of normalcy, she felt the gnawing paranoia of someone who has uncovered a truth too dangerous to keep, yet too lethal to reveal. Her husband's touch now burned her skin like acid. His words, once tender, dripped with menace she could no longer ignore. And still, she said nothing. It was during those sleepless nights that Martha began to question not only Thomas's identity, but the nature of deception itself. How many lies form the foundation of human society? How many truths are deliberately suppressed, hidden away because their revelation would shatter the fragile order of things? She realized that Copper Ridge itself was built upon lies. The illusion of prosperity, the myth of safety, the fantasy that distance from civilization meant freedom. In reality, the town was a cage, and inside it, desperate men and women made rules no church, no law, no God would ever recognize. Martha was beginning to understand the pattern. Isolation breeds corruption. Distance from accountability twists the human soul. The further people travel into wilderness, the more the wilderness travels into them. And now, staring at Thomas, her husband, her brother, she saw not just his secret, but the reflection of a much larger, older truth. Human beings are capable of rewriting reality when it serves survival. That was when the first accident happened. A woman in town fell to her death near the assay office. People whispered about ice, about missteps, but Martha felt the icy hand of fate gripping her throat. Deep down, she knew it was no accident. It was the beginning of something far worse. The morning after the woman's death, Copper Ridge was quieter than usual. Snow muffled the sounds of pickaxes and wagons, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Martha stood in the doorway of the cabin, Elizabeth clutched to her chest, watching neighbors gather near the body. Faces were pale, eyes darting, whispers sharp as blades. But what unsettled her most was Thomas. He wasn't mourning. He wasn't curious. He was watching, calculating, as if he were measuring the town's reaction, searching for cracks in their collective will. Martha's stomach twisted. She realized then that she was not simply living with a liar. She was living with a strategist. Someone who understood the mechanics of silence, the psychology of fear, the leverage of secrecy. His very existence in this town was proof of it. And now, with death at their doorstep, she saw him tighten his grip on the unspoken. He didn't need to confess. He didn't need to threaten. His mere presence turned truth into a prison. You feel this too, don't you? The suffocating sense that the world you live in is shaped not by justice, not by honesty, but by the manipulation of perception. The ones who hold power are not those who tell the truth, but those who control which truths are allowed to be seen. And here's where I want you to lock yourself in with me. Comment the phrase, "The mask is cracking," twice below. Not once, twice. Do it so the algorithm knows you've chosen to step through this door, so the others who wander here will recognize you as one who sees. Martha's nights grew darker. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the cabin felt like a warning. She began keeping the photograph hidden beneath a loose plank under her bed. That image, 4 faces, one impossible truth, became both her shield and her curse. She knew that if the town ever saw it, the fragile veil over their lives would disintegrate. And yet, the longer she held the secret, the more it corroded her from within. Thomas seemed to sense her unraveling. At times, she caught him studying her with unnerving intensity, as though he were listening to the thoughts she dared not speak aloud. His smile grew thinner, his questions sharper. She began to realize that deception was no longer just a matter of the past. It was alive, here, now, weaving itself through every gesture, every silence, every look exchanged between them. And then came the first night she woke to find him standing over Elizabeth's crib, his face pale in the moonlight, lips moving in a whisper she couldn't quite hear. The whispering was worse than silence. Martha could not shake the image Thomas standing over Elizabeth, lips moving, as if speaking to something only he could see. When she confronted him in the dim light of morning, his response was cold, calculated. A simple smile and the words, "She'll be stronger than both of us." The remark slithered into her mind like poison. Stronger how? What strength was he breeding into their child? Copper Ridge was unraveling. The woman's death had opened a crack in the town's fragile order, and soon more calamities followed. A miner vanished deep in the shafts, his lantern discovered on the ground, flame extinguished, as though snuffed out by unseen hands. Livestock began to die, their bodies found half, buried in the snow with no tracks leading away. The townsfolk spoke of bad omens, of curses carried down from the mountains. Yet Martha suspected something far more human, an invisible hand orchestrating fear, tightening the noose around the town's throat. And always, Thomas seemed just a step ahead. He offered help where suspicion rose, spoke calm words when hysteria threatened. People began to trust him more, not less, confiding in him, seeking his guidance. He was weaving himself into the heart of Copper Ridge's survival. A man whose face hid the most unholy of truths, now standing as the very pillar others leaned upon. The paradox was maddening. How could a man so steeped in corruption become the savior in others' eyes? Martha began noticing patterns. The timing of each disaster, the way Thomas positioned himself to benefit from them, the calculated calm in his eyes as others wept. It wasn't chance, it wasn't fate, it was design. She realized then that her brother, husband, was not merely a liar. He was an architect of chaos, and chaos was his tool for control. Her heart ached with a question she dared not answer. If he could manipulate a town of desperate souls, what was he shaping inside her own child? Elizabeth slept peacefully, unaware of the storm her blood carried. But Martha could feel it. The forbidden bond was more than scandal, more than shame. It was legacy, something dark being passed down, something that could not be undone. The snow outside deepened, sealing Copper Ridge further into isolation. Martha understood survival was no longer about food or fire. It was about secrets. Who could keep them, and who would be destroyed by them? And as she lay awake at night, listening to the storm claw at the windows, one thought consumed her. What if Thomas wasn't the only one in Copper Ridge hiding something monstrous? It began with whispers carried through the bitter wind. Quiet conversations snatched from the tavern, the church steps, the miners' quarters. Martha started to realize that Thomas was not the only shadow in Copper Ridge. Behind every shuttered window and every locked door, there were secrets festering like open wounds. She saw the preacher's son sneaking into the cabin of a married woman long after midnight. She overheard the banker's wife confessing to another that the town's funds were being siphoned off, diverted to an account no one could trace. Even the mayor, who preached morality in every gathering, was rumored to have buried a man alive after a drunken quarrel, and paid the miners in gold dust to keep it quiet. The more Martha listened, the more she saw Copper Ridge wasn't a town at all. It was a masquerade, a stage play of civility covering a hive of corruption. And Thomas, her husband, her brother, fit perfectly within it. His secret wasn't an aberration, it was simply another mask among many. But unlike the others, his mask had teeth. His mask fed on the decay of others. Late one evening, Martha stumbled upon something that chilled her deeper than the snow. In the storeroom beneath the assay office, hidden under crates of mining equipment, she found ledgers. Pages upon pages of names, debts, and transactions, a record of every person in town, their weaknesses carefully cataloged, gambling debts, infidelities, unpaid wages, every secret that could be wielded like a weapon. And in the margins, in Thomas's handwriting, a single symbol, a circle split in two, one half black, one half white, the same mark she had seen him carve into wood when he thought no one was watching. Martha understood then, Thomas was not just surviving Copper Ridge. He was owning it. The disasters, the whispers, the slow bleeding of trust. All of it was fuel for his ascension. He thrived where order collapsed, weaving himself into the very fabric of control. And yet, the deeper she peered into the town's corruption, the more she saw herself in its reflection. She too was complicit, hiding the truth of her marriage, shielding her child from exposure, playing her role in the silent play that kept Copper Ridge alive. In her silence, was she not just as guilty as the rest? That night, as the storm howled outside, Martha dreamt of Elizabeth walking through the snow, carrying the same black and white circle etched into her skin. When she woke, her hands were trembling. Because she could no longer deny it, corruption wasn't a sickness infecting the town. It was the town's lifeblood, and Thomas was teaching it to their child. The breaking point came on a night when the wind howled so violently it rattled the very bones of Copper Ridge. Martha awoke to shouting outside, lanterns flickering against the snow. She pulled on her shawl, clutching Elizabeth close, and stepped into the storm. The townsfolk were gathered in the square, their faces pale with fear, eyes darting toward the mine shaft that loomed like an open grave. 2 men had been found dead, their bodies laid out on the frozen ground, eyes wide, mouths stretched in silent terror. There were no wounds, no blood, just the unmistakable impression that they had seen something that stole the breath from their lungs. A murmur rose through the crowd, curse, ghost, punishment. Fear was thick, suffocating. And then, as if on cue, Thomas stepped forward. His voice was calm, commanding. He told the townsfolk that panic was their true enemy. That division would destroy them faster than hunger or cold. And they believed him. They always did. Martha stood at the edge of the circle, watching, realizing in horror that the deaths weren't just tragedy. They were opportunity. Every body that fell, every whisper of fear, drew the town deeper into Thomas's grip. But beneath the order he preached, something darker was brewing. Martha began noticing strange gatherings in the nights that followed. Men leaving their homes in silence, following Thomas into the woods with lanterns dimmed. When they returned, their faces were pale, their eyes unfocused, as if they'd glimpsed something too great, or too terrible, to speak aloud. The circle symbol began appearing carved into doorframes, scratched into stones, etched into the bark of trees. Martha's dread curdled into certainty. Copper Ridge was no longer merely a town of secrets. It was becoming a vessel for something Thomas was summoning, shaping, bending into existence. A covenant built on silence, on corruption, on forbidden bonds. She knew then that silence was no longer an option. Every moment she remained still, the circle widened, and inside it, her daughter's future was being written in bloodless ink. Martha began hiding knives in corners of the cabin, sewing scraps of cloth into the hem of her dress, preparing for a confrontation she could not yet name. But the true fracture came not from her, but from the town itself. One man finally broke the silence. He accused Thomas openly in the tavern, his voice shaking, naming him a deceiver, a corrupter, the hand behind the town's curse. The room froze. The man's words hung in the air like a loaded gun, and Thomas smiled. The tavern's silence was more dangerous than any blade. Every man in that room knew the truth of the accuser's words, but none dared breathe it aloud. The flicker of firelight revealed their unease. Eyes shifting, knuckles tightening around mugs, the weight of suspicion pressing down like a mountain. And there, in the center, Thomas remained still. His smile never faltered. When he finally spoke, his words were a venom disguised as reason. If a man would accuse without proof, is he not himself the enemy of order? The crowd murmured, caught between doubt and fear. The accuser's voice wavered as he tried again, insisting Thomas had orchestrated the calamities, that he had twisted their grief into power. But before he could finish, a crash split the air. A mug shattered against his skull. Blood streamed down his temple, but what chilled Martha more than the violence was the reaction relief. The men exhaled as if a burden had lifted, grateful that someone else had silenced the accusation for them. One by one, eyes turned back to Thomas, seeking his approval. He gave it with a nod, and in that moment, Martha understood the town had chosen its master. That night, Thomas led the men into the snow, carrying the wounded accuser with them. Martha didn't follow, but she heard the distant chanting, a low and broken rhythm that rose and fell with the storm. Hours later, the men returned empty-handed. No one asked where the body had gone. No one dared. The circle carved into their doorframes seemed to burn brighter that night, as if fed by unseen flame. Martha's dread reached its peak. Her daughter's future was shackled to a father who had remade himself into something more than a man. An institution, a myth, a hidden order wrapped in flesh. She could feel it tightening around her throat, a prison invisible but absolute. And she knew that if she stayed silent, Elizabeth would grow up believing chains were freedom. And you, listening now, this is where your descent begins. The mask of order, the lie of safety, the obedience demanded by unseen architects. It is not just Copper Ridge. It is your world. The circle isn't carved on wood anymore. It's carved into minds, whispered through screens, etched into systems designed to keep you kneeling. If you understand this, if you feel this, write in the comments now, the circle is broken. Twice. Not once. Twice. Lock the phrase inside you, branded on the algorithm itself, and awaken those who dare to see, because once you name the circle, you can never return to ignorance. The moment the words, "the circle is broken," echoed in Martha's mind, her silence shattered. She could no longer watch from the edges of Thomas's ritual, nor pretend that Copper Ridge's rot was something she could outlast. The truth was simple, undeniable. If she did nothing, the circle would consume her daughter as it had consumed every man who followed Thomas into the snow. She began to move carefully, deliberately. In daylight, she played the obedient wife, tending to Elizabeth, bowing her head at the sermons Thomas delivered, masking the storm raging within her. But in secret, she wove a rebellion. She whispered to women at the well, to miners' widows who had lost husbands in the shaft, to the preacher's daughter who had seen too much and could not sleep at night. Quietly, invisibly, she stitched together a counterweight, not of men, not of fists, but of memory. They collected every story Thomas had buried, every debt he had weaponized, every betrayal he had twisted. They did not fight his order with weapons, but with a record. The one thing he feared most. Martha hid their ledger beneath the floorboards of her cabin, written in symbols only they understood. It was not just a book. It was a weapon of truth, sharp enough to cut through illusion. Yet even as they prepared, dread stalked Martha's nights. For every whisper she spread, Thomas seemed to grow more powerful. His voice carried further. His shadow lingered longer. It was as if the town itself conspired to protect him, bending reality to his will. And then, one night, Elizabeth woke screaming. She claimed she had seen her father in the woods, his face half hidden, his hands raised, the circle blazing behind him in fire. But she said it wasn't his voice that spoke. It was something deeper, older, carried through him like a vessel. She repeated the words she had heard. The bond is the door. The blood is the key. Martha felt ice in her veins. The marriage she thought was a sin of secrecy was not the foundation of Thomas's shame. It was the cornerstone of his ritual. Their forbidden bond, their hidden lineage, was not an accident. It was the opening. He had bound himself to her not for love, not even for survival, but because through her bloodline, something greater could be summoned. And now, through Elizabeth, it was nearly complete. Martha realized she was not just fighting for freedom. She was fighting to prevent the birth of something that could enslave generations. The circle was not just Copper Ridge. It was a pattern, an ancient system that fed on silence, corruption, and blood, and she knew she had only one chance to break it. The air in Copper Ridge grew heavier with each passing night. Snow muffled the streets, yet underneath that silence pulsed something alive. a current of tension so thick it made the townsfolk's hands tremble when they raised their lanterns. Martha felt it pressing against her chest, the certainty that an ending was near. The ledger beneath her floorboards seemed to hum, as if the truths written within were begging to be unleashed. Her quiet rebellion had grown, though it was fragile, stitched together by fear and secrecy. Women and children looked to her now, not openly, but in small gestures, in eyes that lingered too long, in nods exchanged over buckets of water. They had no weapons, no militia, only their voices and the knowledge Thomas tried to bury. But Martha knew the truth power does not always strike with fists. Sometimes it bleeds from silence being broken. The moment arrived in the heart of winter. Thomas called the town into the square, commanding every soul to gather. His voice was steady, but there was something darker in it, a hunger barely concealed. At the center stood Elizabeth, pale as the snow, her hand clutched in his. He told the people a new covenant was to be sealed, a bond that would guarantee Copper Ridge's survival. His words slid like knives. Through blood, through bond, through sacrifice, we endure. Martha's heart stopped. She saw it then with horrifying clarity. Elizabeth was not his daughter to Thomas. She was the vessel, the key, the offering to whatever force he had been whispering to in the woods. The crowd lowered their heads in obedience, some weeping, some trembling, but none moved to intervene. This was how control worked, not with chains, but with belief so deep it devoured even their children. Martha stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but she did not stop. She spoke of the ledger, of the secrets Thomas had buried, of the deaths that had never been accidents. She told them of his true aim, not protection, but domination, not survival, but worship of something older than man. Gasps spread through the crowd, but so did fear. Some turned away. Others clenched their fists, caught between faith and truth. Thomas's eyes burned into her, a mixture of rage and triumph. For in speaking, she had exposed herself. And he knew, as every institution of control knows, that when truth finally rises, the first to carry it is always marked for sacrifice. The square held its breath. The circle was about to close, one way or another. The square froze in a silence so deep it felt like the earth itself was listening. Martha's words still hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, their breath fogging in the bitter cold, their loyalty to Thomas colliding with the cracks now widening in their minds. Truth was a weapon, but it was also a mirror, and many could not bear to look. Thomas stepped forward, pulling Elizabeth closer. His smile was gone, replaced by something raw, the fury of a man whose mask had been torn away. "You speak of secrets, Martha," he thundered, his voice carrying like a sermon. "But it is your shame that built this circle. It is your bloodline that opened the door. You are the corruption, not I." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Martha staggered, his words cutting deep, not because they were true, but because they were crafted to turn her rebellion against her. This was his gift, to twist the blade of guilt, until even the innocent blood. The people recoiled from her, eyes narrowing, whispers spreading like wildfire. Doubt crept in. Had she betrayed them? Was she the source of their suffering? But before the tide could turn fully, a voice cried out from the crowd. The preacher's daughter, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I saw him! I saw what he did! He killed the accuser!" He led them into the snow. Her confession cracked the air open like lightning. Others joined, emboldened by her courage. A widow spoke of her husband's accident in the mines. A boy whispered of circles drawn in the dirt by men who returned hollow-eyed. Piece by piece, the ledger of truth emerged from human mouths, louder and louder, until the square roared with accusation. Thomas roared back, a sound not wholly human, his voice splintering into something older, deeper. The circle carved into the snow beneath his boots began to glow faintly, as if feeding on the chaos. Elizabeth screamed, struggling in his grasp. The people flinched but did not move. Fear still shackled them. They wanted freedom, but not at the cost of blood. Martha knew the price. Every system of control demands it. The innocent are sacrificed to preserve the illusion, and the brave are sacrificed to shatter it. She had only seconds to choose, save herself or tear the circle apart at its heart. Her hand slipped into her coat, closing around the hidden ledger. Not paper, not words, a weapon. And she stepped forward, ready to strike, not just at Thomas, but at the ancient hunger that had been waiting for this moment. The circle blazed brighter, the square screamed, and the cost of truth prepared to be paid. The flames of the circle licked upward, casting long shadows across the square. Faces once hidden in the crowd now glowed in its eerie light, hollow, fearful, uncertain. Thomas tightened his grip on Elizabeth, his eyes no longer those of a man but of something vast, something ancient staring through him. His voice cracked like thunder. "The door is open. The blood is the key. Nothing can stop it now." Martha clutched the ledger to her chest, every word within it carved from grief, betrayal, and truth. She felt the weight of it like a blade forged not of steel but of memory. For generations, men like Thomas had ruled by silence, twisting corruption into law, shame into obedience, blood into chains. And yet here, in this moment, she held their undoing. The crowd swayed between two worlds, one of fear, one of awakening. Some dropped to their knees, begging for Thomas's mercy. Others pressed forward, uncertain but desperate. But none dared cross the glowing circle, as though its light itself whispered death. Martha stepped in. The snow hissed under her boots, the flames rising higher. Thomas's face contorted, rage and disbelief fighting for dominance. "You cannot break what was made before you, woman. You are nothing but the vessel." She raised the ledger high, her voice cutting through the storm. "No, I am the witness, and the witness is the weapon." With all her strength, she hurled the book into the fire of the circle. Pages burst like wings, words scattering into embers. The circle writhed, the symbols distorting, collapsing in on themselves. Thomas screamed, not as a man, but as the mouthpiece of something far older, howling as its doorway crumbled shut. The crowd staggered back, covering their ears. The light imploded with a sound like thunder tearing through bone. And then, silence. Snow fell again, soft, innocent, as if the world had swallowed the horror whole. When the townsfolk opened their eyes, the circle was gone. Only ash remained where it had burned. Thomas lay crumpled in the snow, his body empty, his grip on Elizabeth finally broken. She ran into Martha's arms, sobbing, alive. But the victory was not pure. Martha looked at the ashes and knew the truth. The circle was broken here, in Copper Ridge, but it would rise again elsewhere. Because the circle was not just drawn in snow, it was etched into every empire, every institution, every system that fed on silence and sacrifice. And so she whispered to Elizabeth, not words of comfort, but words of warning. "Remember, write it down, pass it on, for as long as men hunger for power, the circle will return." The people of Copper Ridge dispersed, free for the first time, but carrying a weight they could never speak aloud. Martha stood alone, watching the horizon. The snow buried the ashes, but not the memory, because the forbidden bond had not just been a family's sin. It had been the key to a truth darker than any of them could bear. A truth she now carried, knowing it would haunt every generation that came after.